How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Tombstone's Takes. I am Tombstone. I'm a librarian, and I'm here to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and interesting about books. And a while back, a couple of weeks ago, I went through one shelf, just one shelf only. I think it was this one right up here behind me. And on my bookshelf tour, I have a number of books in the house. Sometimes I have some boxes in places because I just don't have the room in the house. And so we're going to explore them all as we go through this booktube journey together. And so tonight I'm going to do this lower shelf behind me. I've already pulled some of the books from the one shelf, and we'll just show you what I've got on here. None of my shelves here are set up for the purposes of aesthetics. I know a lot of people love to have their bookshelves set up for aesthetics. I have my bookshelves set up so I can grab books at any time when I want to get them. And sometimes I end up with boxes in my walk-in closet, and my wife's like, how can I not maneuver in here because you were looking through books? But anyways, that's not why you came. You came to see the books. So let's get on to it. First book, this one right here, obviously, is an encyclopedia for Marvel Universe. It's awesome. It's got a lot of information on characters, their history, their stats of who they are. I'm going to put it right back down there as we move on. If you like Marvel, go ahead and pick that up and study it, because that's what comic book fiends do, right? Okay, I do not know where I got this next book, but I have this illustrated copy of Edgar Allan Poe's Tales. Let's see if I can't let's look at some of this on there. I don't know if you can see some of that. Let me see if I can't find some other illustrations here. But if you love Edgar Allan Poe, if you like to see interesting art, you can see all kinds of interesting art in Edgar Allan Poe's Tales. Here, I've got that illustrated copy. That's pretty awesome. My next little bit on the shelf is, they are a few of my books in my Peter Straub collection. So the first one is called Poe's Children, New Horror. Peter Straub edited this anthology. It's got a who's who array of voices who are working in horror today. This book came out 10 or 12 years ago, but it's got some great stories in it. It's got Dan Kayon and Steve Raznick Tem and Melanie Tem and Joe Hill and Neil Gaiman. I think this is the first time I came across the story October in the Chair by Neil Gaiman. Oh, I love that story. I might talk about it this October. Another Peter Straub book that I have here is If You Could See Me Now. I think this is his second book. I think the first book that he released was Julia. And then there's this one when he was still telling his ghost stories, and that one is prior to Ghost Story. Sorry, I was interrupted there for a moment. I was talking about If You Could See Me Now by Peter Straub. This was, as I believe it's his second book. I think the first one was Julia. I think he tried to write literary stuff before that, and his career didn't really go well. So he wrote Julia, and then If You Could See Me Now, when they're ghost story types of books. And then after those ones, he did Ghost Story, which is probably one of his two most celebrated works. And if you read horror, you've heard about this book. You've probably seen it a lot on BookTube. This is a fantastic book. I actually love If You Could See Me Now as well. I don't know if I have a favorite. Obviously, Ghost Story is a little bit more intricate in the way that it's told, and it remains a horror classic to this day. Then I also have Coco, and I believe Coco won, what was it though, the World Fantasy Award that Coco won. This book, now don't quote me on that right away, I'm just going by memory here, but Coco, this is the other one of his books that is talked about often, and this gets into some of his other later novels that become this interconnected world with some of the same characters that you're seeing over and over again. And this one is about some men who come back from the same platoon in Vietnam, and some weird things start to happen and people start dying, and how is it all connected? And then I have a copy of Shadowland here. I've seen this one talked about quite a bit on BookTube. This one, in some ways, could you describe this as a portal fantasy? I think some people would describe this as a portal fantasy, but this is another fun book by Peter Straub. All of his books are a little bit more literary in some ways, in the way that he uses language, than some other horror / fantasy writers. But many of you who read Stephen King are plenty familiar with Peter Straub being the man who collaborated with Stephen King on The Talisman and Black House. Okay, what do I have next on my list? That was my little Peter Straub collection that's out here. I probably have more somewhere, but those are the ones that are out on these shelves. I have other bookcases located in different parts of the house. What do I've got next? Right here. I've got Umberto Eco. This is The Island of the Day Before. This one I've had for years, and I have not read it yet. That's a shame, but I have read Umberto Eco's some of his other tales, obviously The Name of the Rose and Foucault's Pendulum, and I highly enjoyed those. Now, I am going to get next into the man who is one of my favorite comedy / fantasy / whatever writers. And no, it's not Terry Pratchett. Well, time out. Yes, Terry Pratchett is one of my favorite fantasy / comedy writers. But when I say that it's not him, I meant it's not his books that I'm going to show you at the moment. But I have Martin Millar, and he gets limited talk here in the States. I know that he's a lot bigger across the pond, but I've got Ruby and the Stone Age Diet, which is a fun tale, but to me it's not half as funny as the next book that I'm going to show you, which is The Good Fairies of New York, which are about two fairies, and they want to be in a punk band. And yeah, just madness ensues when they go to live with this guy who's trying to pick up on his neighbor. And it is an absolutely hilarious book. I love every minute of it. And I opened it up. It's hilarious from the first paragraph. His next book, this one right here, which is The Goddess of Buttercups and Daisies. This one is fun, okay, but there's a caveat to this for those people who want to look at some humorous tales from Martin Millar, is that you need to know a bit about ancient Greece in order to truly get some of what's going on in here. Sometime because he's just mentioning different playwrights and different real people and mythological characters and different things of that nature. And if you don't have really a solid foundation in ancient Greece, you might not get everything that he's talking about. Now, to be fair about Martin Millar, if you are, okay, so some of his books, for people who are very intense and opinionated about how a book is written, I will be the first to tell you that Martin Millar's writing skills and all of these books aren't necessarily, they're not the most well-written books of all time. In fact, there's a lot to be desired in the actual writing. There's a lot of telling, not showing. There's a lot of repetition where he repeats and lets you know, hey, this is what happened just back when, and you already know it. And he is always reinforcing what had just happened. But these books are laugh out loud funny, and so I don't care. They are some of my favorite books of all time to read because of that. And I'm sitting there reading it and I'm like, how did this even get published ever? And yet I'm still reading these books because they are just that flat out funny. So the next is Lonely Werewolf Girl. Now this is the second Martin Millar book that I read. I think the first one was The Good Fairies of New York. This came out at a time where I think a lot of people were shunning werewolves. Well, it came out here in the States at a time when people were shunning werewolves and whatnot. But I picked it up on the sheer force of Martin Millar's name in general. And weird little side note on this. Recently, I was watching that Netflix show Archives 81 on Netflix, and there's a scene in there where I saw this book on the shelves in that series, and I was like, oh man, look at that, and I had to pause it, and there it was in the background. I was like, yeah, nobody knows who Martin Millar is. I love it. And so his werewolf trilogy, from Lonely Werewolf Girl to Curse of the Wolf Girl to Kalix the Werewolf, The Anxiety of Kalix the Werewolf. I love these books. It's sad that they didn't get any kind of real consistency on the cover art of that, but that doesn't matter as much as the words in the book. So the next books that I have on my shelf here, I have some classics. And some of these, I think one of these copies was mine, and I think the other was my wife's. And it doesn't matter because we can talk about how I love one book over the other while she loves the other book over. So let's just get into it. So I've got this compilation here of Charlotte and Emily Bronte. So the novels, right? So you've got Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights and Shirley and all that stuff in here. And then we've also got other classics. We've got the Jane Austen novels. So you're going to get like Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility and whatnot in there. And so my wife and I will look at these and argue about, maybe which of the Bronte sisters were better. She likes to read Jane Eyre. I like Wuthering Heights. My wife can't stand any of the characters in Wuthering Heights. I just think that it's a great tale. Anyway, I found it way more engaging than Jane Eyre. We can all laugh a bit at Jane Austen and her books as well. Those ones are quite a bit more lighthearted than the Brontes are. Also, what I have here, I know I have the sequel to, I think this is the first one. So I've got Seanan McGuire's The Girl in the Green Silk Gown. here, and then I think Sparrow Hill Road is the second one. I haven't read the third one yet, but I do have the other Seanan McGuire, and I can't remember if this one's the first one or if Sparrow Hill Road's the first one. So, but these are pretty fun. The second one, let me look this up. Is this one? I can't remember if this is the second one or not. Yeah, this one, The Girl in the Green Silk Gown, I think is the second one. And I think that this one was a lot better. And the reason it's a lot better in the sense of being a cohesive narrative. The first one was a frame story, meaning that she wrote 10 or 12 short stories and then they got collected as a single novel. And so there's some things that kind of repeat, and it doesn't just rev up and get started in one narrative like this one does. So although I enjoyed the first one, it's not quite as cohesive as one narrative, as one tale as this is. And then I do have, again, the complete works of Edgar Allan Poe. And I know that I had this before I had found that illustrated Tales edition somewhere else. And then lastly, I have this Folio Society edition of Don't Look Now by Daphne du Maurier, which is, she's obviously the author of Rebecca, but this is just a fantastically illustrated book here. But this one isn't one single narrative. This is a collection of short stories. One of the things that was fantastic about this is that you get this Folio Society edition of a book. I got it for $8 at a library book sale, and there were a few others that I didn't get that I had wanted at that time. I mean, I couldn't snatch it up at the moment in time when I saw it. There were too many people vying for it, but at least I got that one. Folio Society editions are great, especially when you can grab them for less than $10 and in such pristine shape. So that's what I've got on my bookshelf tour. That's just one shelf. These things are, one day I'll probably be as organized as I am at work. Librarians are organizing these books all the time. These kind of get haphazard. In fact, my wife probably organizes them more and better than I do out here, but that's because I'm always taking them off the shelves, looking them up, doing a bunch of other things with them, having them in my reading station in the house. But thanks for hanging out with me and looking at some of these books that I've got on my bookshelf. Maybe next time we'll go through some of the Lord of the Rings books that I've got, and then we'll start going through some of the boxes and whatnot. If you like what I do, give me a like and subscribe. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.